Welcome to the podcast, Entrepreneur Perspectives, building and protecting your business one podcast at a time, a CASSource family production. This podcast exists in large part because of CASCM, the content marketing business inside CASSource Inc. So what does CASCM do? You know how many business leaders need help communicating their story? Well, that's what we do. Content creation and distribution for business leaders. This provides opportunities, relationships, and a platform for you and your business. Why do we do this? Because at CASCM, we exist to help business leaders build a meaningful legacy that is worth living and leaving. Learn more by visiting CASCM.com. In this episode, we discuss being a solopreneur, generating recurring revenue, and podcasting. Our guest today is David Shriner-Cahn, co-founder of the BestNetwork and host of the business podcast Smashing the Plateau. BestNetwork helps guide expertise-driven solopreneur business owners to build stable and consistent recurring revenue. Along with BestNetwork, David runs the Smashing the Plateau podcast. Smashing the Plateau helps you get unstuck so you can do what you love and get paid what you're worth. David's examples of helping entrepreneurs smash the plateau are on full display in our chat. His success in business has us so excited to feature him on this podcast. And with so much to talk about, let's get right into this episode and welcome David Shriner-Cahn. David, you are big into podcasting, and we wrote an article recently about you should have a podcast. And I say that a lot. You should have a podcast. I meet people all the time, and I look at them, and I'm like, wow, the way you talk, the way you communicate, all these different things, you should have a podcast. Well, David, you do have a podcast, but I have to ask you, because you've had a podcast before, and you're going to be coming out with even another podcast. Why do you have a podcast?
Okay, so in all honesty, I started podcasting not because somebody said to me, David, you should have a podcast, or I thought I should have a podcast. I actually knew nothing about podcasting. It was, like many things in business and life, there's a little bit of trial and error, and most things are kind of iterative. So we had a blog, and one of the things that we had done successfully in our blog was we were posting consistently. We started off about 2 years before I launched the podcast, posting 2 posts a week on a written blog, and then we increased it to 5 posts per week by showcasing other people. And the way we showcased other people, I would send them 5 questions, and they weren't exactly the same questions for each person. We modified them a little bit depending upon who they were. They answered the questions we posted on the blog. So it was an easy way to generate content consistently. And the feedback we got from the audience was they wanted more. They wanted to hear more about the guests. And so and actually my team suggested to me, why not do audio interviews? And I'm like, what are they? So that was the evolution of the podcast. I didn't know that I would be any good at it, didn't know whether I would like it. Like doing anything for the first time, I was quite anxious about it because I had never done anything like this. And it turned out that I actually really like it. I like meeting people. I'm really curious. I love hearing people's stories. So what a great way to be able to do this. Once a week I get to showcase somebody else's story. And actually we were producing 2 shows a week until the end of 2018. So we've produced quite a few stories. And so that's why I started it. And by the way, Eric, I don't necessarily agree that everybody should have a podcast. We could talk about that too if you want.
No, I would love to talk about that because I actually do agree with that, right? So I think things can pull in 2 directions. Not everyone should have a podcast, and too much of a thing is not necessarily a good thing. So if you don't qualify because you're not well spoken, or it just takes too much of your time, or you don't have the time, there's so many different layers that go with it. But when I talk to someone that I genuinely feel should have a podcast, and they perhaps agree to some level, it's like you said, if you can get started and if you can get over that hump, that initial hurdle that you were talking about, because we've all had it. We're like, wait a second, I'm going to turn on this microphone, I'm going to record myself, I'm going to talk to someone else. Who wants to listen to me talk? If you can get over that and you have something to say and you can contribute something and not just put more noise out there, then I do think that people could have a podcast if it fits what they're trying to do in their business. But, give me your take as to why you don't think everyone should have a podcast, but also maybe on the other side, the type of people that you think perhaps should have a podcast.
So I'm going to back up a step and talk about leadership. To me, leadership means you want to inspire others to take some particular kind of action. And if you want to inspire others, then being able to share your ideas so you have a methodology for connecting with others and inspiring them, then being able to share your message with through some medium is an important methodology for you to act as a leader. And then I think it's important for you to figure out what channel works best for who you are and how you're most comfortable sharing your message, and then generate content so that you will inspire others to take action. So for many people, that could be creating a podcast. For other people, they may not like generating audio content, but they like writing. So a written blog could be great. For people who like to see and be seen, doing video could be great. And the other thing to think about is in your audience, people learn, they learn differently. Everybody has a preferred methodology for learning. So it's like for me, when I need to get instructions, I would much rather read an instruction manual, not necessarily something that's really voluminous, but something that gets to the point and tells me how to do something, rather than watch YouTube videos to try to figure out how to do something. And I know there are a lot of people that love watching YouTube videos to learn new things. My preferred methodology is actually to read a book or to read something written. I do like hearing people's stories in an audio format. So for me, the storytelling and what I learn from a story can be really beneficial with audio. But again, so think about what your preferred methodology is for transmitting your message, communicating it to the people whom you want to inspire, and think about where they are and where they might be most inclined to receive your message, and how they would learn the most from your message.
That's an important point that you make, because we've talked with a lot of, you said leaders, and we talk about business leaders all the time. Leaders say, well, I don't like, let's say, Twitter. And we sat in a conference room and we were talking to this business leader, and he's like, I don't like Twitter. But at the same time, he was giving us names of people he wanted to communicate with. And I said, well, okay, let's look them up on the different platforms. Where do you think they were most active on? They were most active on, at the time, and this is a couple years ago, they were most active on Twitter. I said, well, it doesn't matter necessarily what you like to a point. Your audience is here, and can you contribute there? And if you can't, you can't, and that's okay. I do want to get to another point that you were making, or a point that I want to take it to, as far as when you put the content out there and you're creating this stuff and you're being a leader and you're trying to inspire, and it doesn't necessarily have to be because you want to generate income from that, you want to generate revenue from that. But at the same time, you talk to different leaders, whether it's creating a podcast, a blog, videos, pictures, any of those different things. You've obviously done a podcast, you've created, you've used a blog, you've written before. Has it helped your business? I want to start with a yes or no, and I think it's a simple answer there. And then, how has it helped your business? If it yes.
So yes, it has helped my business. Content creation is not. Some people look at it as that is going to be the methodology that generates income. For me, and what I've seen with most people, the content creation itself is not what generates income. It's something related to the content creation that generates business. So one of the great benefits to me of podcasting is the people that I'm able to connect with, people who've been my guests. When I've been guests on other people's shows, we've been able to end up doing things together because we got to know each other in a way that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I'll give you one example. Another veteran podcaster is Jamie J, who He started his podcast around the same time as me. We ended up meeting through our podcast, and we ended up creating a virtual summit together called 3-Day MBA. That never would have happened without the podcast for either of us. And the reality is we have never met physically in person.
Well, that's it right there, right? Because you have opportunities to talk to people you otherwise would not have met. We've had conversations with people that we would never have had a conversation with if they were not a guest on our podcast. And that's, proof. We had it. Brian King, who's not coming to our office, a very busy guy. He's in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'll link to it in the show notes here. But he doesn't come to our office if he's not being featured on a podcast, as an example. He comes in here and we get to dive deep and have conversations about his upbringing. We learn about his business and why he loves to mentor young professionals. And we get to learn, like you said, all about him. And therefore, from there, we start having conversations with him about all sorts of things. And I agree with you. That is a way to do it. But what we're running into, and you're probably seeing this because you work with a lot of solopreneurs, is why should I create content? Again, it doesn't have to be a podcast. It could be a blog, it could be pictures, it could be videos, it could be all those different things. So many times people are looking at, what's my ROI? If I spend an hour doing that, what do I get in return? And it's a conversation I'm assuming that you're having as you help and mentor and coach solopreneurs in their careers or their next stage of their careers. How do you address the question of ROI? Because like you said, you probably couldn't have measured, you probably still can't measure exactly what the ROI is of that first conversation you had with that podcast. And you might have spent hours talking with that individual person. So how do you address the ROI conversation?
It's like relationship building. Like there's an expression in relationship building, pay it forward. Or I've had Bob Berg on my show, who wrote The Go-Givers. In relationship building, what's really important is there are three kinds of people. There's the takers, the givers, and the exchangers, right? If you're a taker, people are probably not going to want to have long-term relationships with you. If you're only a giver and you're not taking, it's a one-way street, and you're constantly helping other people, but you also need to be helped in return. And the ideal for relationship building is exchangers. Now, when you're an exchanger, people who are really good at relationship building and networking understand that when you're developing a new relationship, it's really important to offer to help the other person, particularly offer to help the other person first. And you may not see direct ROI from the relationship with that other person. You are more than likely to see a return that comes back to you in some unexpected way, very often from somebody else. And podcasting and content creation is very often the same way. You are sharing your ideas, you're helping other people, you will be helped in return. But if you're looking for a direct correlation between the amount of hours you're spending creating content and a direct return, it's probably not going to happen.
Do you niche from there? Because you can have conversations with people and they continue to push you on that, what you just said, right? On the ROI and, well, I need to make a return and I need to see the numbers. And no doubt analytics are very important. And you can see, for example, if you do a podcast, how many people are listening, but they're trying to get to that ROI at the very bottom, right? The bottom line, the amount of revenue that came in off of that thing. But you might not be able to identify that because, like you said, it was a relationship. There are people that are not convincible at this point. Are you in the practice, because I see you niching a lot and you're working with a specific group, and I think that's very important. Do you have a mindset of being in business for a while to say, I'm not trying to convince the unconvincible?
I'm definitely not trying to convince the unconvincible. People, look, there are a lot of people that create content. There are a lot of people who don't create content. There are people who don't create content and have very successful businesses. You don't have to create content in order to have a successful business. However, if your business success has to do with generating and sharing ideas, I think content creation can be a great tool for sharing your message, which then in all likelihood will support your business.
No, I would agree with that. And I think that kind of leads to this next part about solopreneurs, okay, someone's a solopreneur and they realize, wow, I really do need to create content. I need to do something. And in our marketing group, we help people create content and we realize they don't have the time to do it. So we do it for ourselves, and then we do it for them too. So that becomes a thing of maximizing their time. They don't have the time, they hire someone else to do it so then they can do it. But you're in these different groups and you're in the podcast and you're a thought leader, you're giving these ideas and then you're helping them out. How do you talk to solopreneurs about maximizing their time and efficiency to then be able to do the things that you think that they could be doing, which is perhaps creating content? And there's other aspects of it. It's not just about content, but while we're on that topic, how are you working with solopreneurs to become more efficient?
So if you're a solopreneur, first of all, let me define solopreneur. To me, a solopreneur is somebody who runs a business where it's primarily one person who is delivering the offering to the client or customer. I don't believe anybody runs a business without a team. Like, as an example, most people who are in business in the US have somebody else who prepares their tax returns. That person is a member of your team. And I think you would find that in your business and in your life, you have people who support the success of your business, but they are not directly delivering the offering to your target customers. So with a solopreneur, being able to be efficient with your time and optimize your time is really important. We can all make more money. We can't make more time. So how do you do that? One thing is you've got to be really clear if you're running a solopreneur business, what is it that you love to do most and what is it that you are most competent at performing? And the intersection of those two is going to be your sweet spot of where you can provide the greatest value. The second component is, whom do you feel most compelled to serve? And what is it about your value proposition that solves a targeted problem that's a big pain point for that population? The recurring part is when you're thinking about how you solve a problem for your ideal customers, what you need to think about is what's an ongoing problem that is a major pain point that if I solve it for these customers every single month, they will be happy. They will want to come back for more. And it isn't necessarily a big ticket item at first. So the place where solopreneurs often have a challenge is they're used to thinking about getting paid because they're offering something on a time for money basis or on a project fee basis. And often the project fees, if you can sell those, they are bigger ticket items and they provide greater cash flow up front. Recurring revenue, especially when you're first getting started, it's probably not big ticket items. It's probably like if you're used to selling something that might be a $10,000 project, maybe you can get a recurring revenue offering to the same client at $500 a month. So it's going to take you a number of months to make the $10,000. But if you have to, with the $10,000 item, if you have to constantly hustle and sell more of those and you're always going from feast to famine, your business will be a lot healthier if you can sell some number of these $500 a month items. Like if you can get 20 clients that are paying you $500 a month, there's your $10,000. And if you get them to want to stay in your client pool, then you don't have to keep hustling and selling more of them nearly as quickly as you would need to hustle and sell these $10,000 jobs.
That's right, because you stay out of the what have you done for me lately mentality, which we had on the insurance side, and we still in some cases live in life insurance, being that it is what have you done for me lately. There's not residual. There's a little bit of residual, but it doesn't match what you typically are doing in the business. So then we created a marketing business for many reasons, and you mentioned the word compelled to serve, and that's where I was like coming in. I'm compelled to serve entrepreneurs, business leaders, small business owners. And if you can create a situation, like you said, to where you can have that recurring revenue, because the customers are happy, and they're happy to pay that because they realize, like you said before, they're part of your team, and that's important. And you also avoid disruption this way. We've seen a lot of businesses not think ahead to where things are going. All of a sudden, that "what have you done for me lately" is dried up. Well, if that's dried up and you have nothing else there to support it, now what happens? And that could dry up for many reasons. Maybe a competitor, maybe the government, maybe the economy. There's so many different things that can play out to get you in trouble to say, uh-oh, I was selling health insurance before and I had a good thing going, but the government came in and said, no more, you can't do it, can't earn revenue. You can, but it's gonna be a lot less, so you gotta go to a different state. What are you gonna do now? That's where content can come in, because you can become a thought leader, and then people are gonna be happy to pay you something for whatever it is you're doing. And the point that I just raised before that you had said is being compelled to serve someone. I think that's important, because I see businesses creating products or solutions or things that maybe they're not compelled to serve someone with that. It's a money-making thing. But if you're compelled to do it, then it's okay to hop on a podcast for an hour like you're doing to talk to someone, because you know you're giving back. If you never talk to anyone, you know that this will be out there and someone can listen somewhere, maybe on the other side of the country. You're in New York, they could be in Los Angeles, they could hear it and they can do something with it. You are doing the right thing at that point, and you know it and I know it, and that's good and that feels good. And then what's going to happen is it will play out. Hopefully, if you continue to do those right things, you're going to have great conversations with people, and they're going to say, David, can you help me out with my business? And I think that's a very important thing to understand, because that is the passion behind it all, and it keeps you going. And I can hear it because I've followed your podcast for a long time. I think it was maybe a year and a half ago I was on your podcast, and so you can track that the time to say he's still going, he's still doing it. And that's exciting. It's exciting to me because I love having conversations with people like you. I learn a lot, but there's like-mindedness, so you get excited about it and you learn what someone else might be doing. And you're also doing something else, because you have a podcast and you're going to be starting a second podcast. We've done the same thing. We have Entrepreneur Perspectives, which is the podcast you're on, and we have a platform called Sportsepreneur, which is, the like-mindedness of the not-so-average sports fan and tying things into business. And we created a podcast behind that, interviewing athletes and their stories and a lot of different things that go with it. It's a lot to keep up with. But you're doing that same thing, because you have your Smashing the Plateau podcast. And the Smashing the Plateau podcast is you help entrepreneurs get unstuck. What have you learned from doing that podcast about learning to help others get unstuck, which we've talked about before, but how have you applied it to your business personally from that podcast that you've been doing?
Well, what I've done in parallel in my own business is I've been in business for 13 years, and I started off trading time for money. I was a single person consultant, and I would sell my time. And I realized, particularly with the feast and famine, the first time the famine hit, I was like, there's got to be some other way to do this. And then I started learning about, in particular, recurring revenue models and models that were more of a long-term program. They weren't always ongoing recurring revenue, but they were certainly much longer than projects. So, selling to somebody a 6-month program or a 12-month program where they wanted to make some kind of improvement in their business, and I could help them do it. But we knew that it wasn't going to happen in 30 days or 60 days. It was more like, we'll get to a certain point within 6 months or within 12 months. And there's a market for that, and people were happy to have that kind of long-term support. And some clients became ongoing clients where it's, I've been working with them for many years on a recurring revenue basis. So for me, I've learned a lot about how to build a business using recurring revenue as a major business strategy.
The recurring revenue piece is important when you're talking about trading money for time, because eventually you can't scale it anymore. If you want to go out of town, if you are not feeling well that day and you can't do certain things, how do you scale it to that next level? I think that is something that we all learn as we build a business. And obviously something that you've learned from talking to countless entrepreneurs that have gone through a similar process. And you learn it through different iterations and different industries. And it's clear to see because you're having these conversations and you're helping other entrepreneurs do what you're talking to them about. You're helping other ones who haven't gone through that process yet. But now, like we talked about before, you're having another podcast come out. Tell us about what this new podcast will be about.
Right. So one of the ways that people often get stuck is not having a sufficiently narrow focus in the problem that they're solving. And what I have learned from my podcast is many of my podcast guests and many people in my audience have become entrepreneurs mid to late career. They've started their career as employees. Many of them have done quite well in the corporate environment. And then something happens where they end up becoming entrepreneurs. In some cases, it's been a proactive shift. In a lot of cases, and I haven't actually looked at the data, but I'm going to guess that the majority of people have made the shift because they've been pushed. And I certainly have seen it more and more in the stories that I've shared on Smashing the Plateau and also with clients, that people who are highly skilled professionals get to a point where they end up being fired. And often it's not because of their performance. Usually it's not because of their performance. It's because something has changed in the marketplace, or the company they work for has been acquired, and the acquiring leadership wants to demonstrate that they're able to cut costs. And how do they cut costs? They fire the people who are earning the most money. Sometimes it's it's a political situation that happens that may have nothing at all to do with them. So there could be a new manager who comes in that's 2 levels up from them, and they decide they want to shift things around and demonstrate that they're able to, again, cost savings or something like that. And they're looking to bring on somebody who's 20 years younger and half the price. Well, what happens is the people who have been terminated, I would say they generally fall into one of 2 camps. Either they were beginning to realize that they didn't fit so well in the corporate environment. There were things they didn't like about it. They would just wanted more control over their destiny. And they may be really interested in being their own boss, but they may not have the tools and the resources to get it to work all that well. So those people become entrepreneurs by design. And then there's the other group that would love to get another job doing what they love doing and getting paid what they're worth, but they find it's just not happening. And they're becoming entrepreneurs by circumstance. They realize the only way that they are going to continue to work and earn enough money to support their livelihood is by being entrepreneurs. And they have a much harder time making it work because they don't have the same level of motivation to be successful as entrepreneurs. And it's a different skill set to run a business than it is to actually perform work in your field. So they need to learn a whole new skill set and be able to build a business while delivering results to their ideal clients. So for me, so what I've learned is I've heard this message over and over from people. I'm thinking, okay, here's a problem that I can solve. I already work with people like this. I've had a lot of success with people like this. Frankly, I was an employee for over 25 years before I started my business. I know what it takes. I know that it's really scary at the beginning. I know, especially if you become unemployed and you're 50 years old or 55, there can be a lot of shame that's involved in this. Your whole identity is caught up in your work. It's like, what do I call myself? I used to call myself, a such and such title in this corporation, which has a lot of pizzazz. Now I don't even know what to call myself when I meet somebody. So it's really daunting at first. And yes, you can be successful in making this shift. Lots of people have done it. You're probably going to have a hard time doing it alone.
It seems that when those conversations, when that person's having that conversation, no matter what, if they fall on because it's a circumstance and they really didn't choose to become an entrepreneur, they're almost forced into it, versus the person that says, oh no, I'm ready, I'm going to go do this, and whatever they want to do. To have a conversation with someone like yourself who's had a lot of conversations with people like them, to then counsel them on the next step. And at least giving them ideas, maybe not telling them exactly what to do, but to think through these things. Because like you said, you could run into that scenario to say, wait a second, that person was never cut out to be an entrepreneur, because they are so focused and they're never going to get rid of, I was a senior vice president at XYZ Incorporated, like you said, that has a lot of pizzazz, and they simply cannot get over that. Do you have those conversations? Because those are hard conversations for a lot of people to have. It seems to me that as you mentor and coach people, that you are the type of person that can have that type of conversation. And those conversations are happening more and more today as so much change, right? There is, oh, I have a guaranteed salary at that XYZ Incorporated. Well, it's only guaranteed until it's not. So there is no such thing as a guarantee. They can come in. I worked at a company. I showed up after a vacation and walked in, and there was security waiting to escort me to my desk. Not because I did anything wrong, but because they decided to shut the division of my company down, and I had to go and collect my stuff. They had let everyone go on a Friday. I came back on a Monday, and that's when I was gone. I kind of figured it out because I had some weird voicemails at my house, and I said to my we were just recently married, that I think my company shut down, and sure enough, when I showed up, it was. That was a wake-up call. My dad had told me for years that those types of things happen and will happen, and get ready for it, right? And then you're like, wow, this is real, and you're seeing it play out for so many other people. I look around, my business and businesses that we work with, and most of the people have gone through something like this. If you've been in business for 10, 15, 20 years, you've seen it. Maybe in the last 10 years, we haven't really had a downturn in the economy, but it's happening. But those conversations are not easy to have. Are you having those conversations with people? Are you that guy that people should be talking to? Because I hear you and I'm like, they need to talk to David, because David needs to give you the truth as to what this is going to look like, and then, think through it from there.
Of course, I'd be happy to speak with anyone who's going through this. It's really tough. As I said, I can relate to it. The first time it happened to me, I was 27, and I was an engineer. I had just gotten a really great performance review and a big raise, and a month later I got fired. And it was same kind of thing. The company I was working for lost like half of its business, and it wasn't my performance, but I was still out of a job. It really sucked, and I was like, well, what am I going to do now? And it took me a while to figure it out. So yes, it can happen. And the good news is, although there is a sense of security when you're getting a paycheck every pay period, the risk that's involved in being an employee is that 100% of your income, unless you have some kind of outside source of revenue, but if you're only getting your income from your paycheck, which is true for a lot of people, if that paycheck dries up, your income goes from 100% to zero. If you have a single person business and you have two clients, and one of your clients says, I don't want to work with you anymore, your income went from 100% to 50%. Not nearly as bad as getting laid off. So yes, it could be scary to be an entrepreneur, but if you have even a small number of clients, your revenue is so much more protected than it is when you're an employee.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we talk about that all the time, where the guarantee, which I mentioned before, and we see it with young professionals a lot. They're coming out of school and they want a guaranteed salary and they want all the benefits that come with it, and they go and get it, and then they find out 6 months later, a year and a half later, whenever that might be, that company doesn't exist anymore, or that things changed, or that they weren't suitable for the position, or they didn't fit the culture. I mean, there's so many different reasons or ways that thing can play out. But on the other side of it, we work with business owners in industries that are being disrupted at a rapid pace now. Maybe they weren't as disrupted a few years ago. It's happening now. And we get a phone call and they said, 2 of my clients have left. They have 8 clients. So that's still a big impact. So like your 2 for 1 scenario, that's not as bad as losing all of it. So they're still in the game, right? If they had 8, now they have 6, but that 2 that they lost was significant revenue for the year. That's a wake-up call. And so they're thinking, and it's interesting that I'm talking to you now because they're thinking recurring revenue. They have that. They have the recurring revenue on a very large scale, right? They're getting paid, like you said, $5,000 a month for their services. Well, now they're trying to create smaller products that they can sell more at a mass based on the content that they create, what they can help put out there to give back passionately because they love this industry. They love what they do so much. And so we see it on both sides of the equation. But going back to the young professional, it's unique because we're living a freelancer economy. So now someone can come out of school and they can go get on Upwork, or they can go do other things. They can edit podcasts. There's a lot of different ways to make money, to make revenue. But so many people are caught up in that I need the American dream where I go to work and I collect a paycheck. Are you having conversations with young professionals that really haven't seen the downturn of an economy yet, and now are being thrown into these things to say, well, maybe what they thought they were going to get, and there's a lot of conversations out there about that, they go join that company and they hate their work to a point where I don't want to do this anymore. This is terrible. I need to do something different. Are you having conversations? Are you seeing what people are going through from a young professional standpoint based on all the things that we've talked about?
Yes, I am having conversations with young professionals. I find that they're, as a general rule, they're a little more flexible in what they expect from their working life, and they're much more adept at starting a freelance business and going from gig to gig than people who may be in their 50s or 60s.
That's interesting because I've seen both. So I've seen that, what you said, but I've also seen the other side because it was planted in them from the beginning, perhaps from their parents or grandparents, that this is what you do. You go to college, you possibly accrue a lot of debt, you come out of school, you go get your entry-level position, and you work and you work and you work, and you get your benefits, you get your vacation days, you get all those different things. So I think it's, everybody's unique, because we have young professionals working for us and they have a great mindset with it. And I've seen other ones that only want a certain thing, and we've directed them and introduced them to people at very large organizations because that's what they need right now. So it's a fascinating time. There's a lot of generations working together right now. We haven't ever had this before. And it's had a vibrant economy for many years in a row. So things are constantly changing, and you're a part of that, and you're an important person to have in these conversations because you bring a lot of experience and you've talked to a lot of people, so you can offer a lot of insight. You've also offered a lot of insight on other podcasts, and we first met, we got introduced to one another, and I got to research you a little bit. And it was funny because one of the first podcasts I ever listened to that had to do with business was Entrepreneurs on Fire by John Lee Dumas. And sure enough, you were on that podcast, and I don't remember what year it would have been. You would have been on it probably 5 or so years ago, maybe, if I'm guessing. That was a very big podcast, and it still is today. And there's so many more podcasts around that niche that exists. But a question I have is, as if you're a thought leader, it's very important to get featured possibly on other people's content, on other people's podcasts, just like you're on this podcast. But going back to that, how does someone like you get onto our podcast, or even a very large, highly listened to podcast like John Lee Dumas's? How did you do that at that time?
So when I started my podcast, I started in 2014. I think John started his podcast in 2012. So he was a couple years ahead of me. And it's a very quickly changing industry. So there was a big difference between 2012 and 2014. There's probably several generations of change between 2014 and now 2019. What I ended up following John initially because he had one of the most well-known business podcasts, one that was focused on entrepreneurs. And I learned a lot by listening to his show, and I ended up joining his community, Podcasters Paradise. So I've had some interaction with John, and then and I don't recall exactly what the mechanism was that enabled me to be a guest on his show. And he was a guest on my show as well. So, one of the things that happens in the podcasting world, if you're a podcaster, it's pretty common to do interview swaps with other podcasts that have interview-based shows around the same topic.
And that's how it happened. Yeah. So, it goes back to what you said at the beginning. This is about relationships. This is about genuine engagement. So there are interview swaps. I like if there's an interview swap, if there's something genuine behind it. It's not the I follow you, you follow me back, but we have no engagement from then on out. No. When I'm on your podcast, I'm paying attention. I see your name. I get your emails. I'm, like I said, paying attention. There's a relationship that's there. And yeah, you can get to a certain point where the person's just so busy and you can possibly never get in front of them because they got thousands of people, reaching out to them. But it goes back to that point of it's a relationship business, and you have these conversations, and like you said, you just get on the podcast. There wasn't really a trick to it. It was genuine engagement, and that's really what this is all about. And that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing on your podcast. I'm excited to listen to your new podcast because it's something I think most entrepreneurs have gone through, of hitting this roadblock or this challenge that might have been something you were a part of and might have had nothing to do with you, right? Things just change. And we're talking about your story when you're 27. It's like, ooh, game over. When I walk in and my company was actually doing well, it's that a new CEO came in and he's like, nah, I don't want to do this anymore. It's over. And that things change. And I think your podcast is going to help people understand that this is real, that it's not a fairyland, that there are bad things that can happen, but you can overcome it. And if you have thoughts, if you have leadership ideas, that you can put that out there too, in the way that, like you said, whether it's in written form or podcasting or videos or in conversations, or maybe it's speaking or networking events, and you do it the right way, you have genuinity behind it, and you build real relationships with people, these good things can happen. We've been through it all, and you might have already touched on this in some way, but I would like you to kind of like wrap it up, if you will. I know we have to kind of get this thing going, but I like to ask our guests, when was the moment you told yourself you needed to make it happen and you gave yourself absolutely no excuses?
Oh, probably. It's happened to me several times in my life, but the first one was, I mentioned that when I was 27, I got laid off. So I said to myself, I have to find another way to make a living besides working as an engineer in corporate. And I made it happen.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
But it wasn't.
It was not simple. And it was not simple. It was not nearly as quick as I would have liked, but I did make it happen, and the rest is history.
Yeah. When you give yourself those no excuses and you can move forward and then look back at it, and like you said, replay that down the road as things will eventually continue to change, you can continue to pull back on those times in the past. And you're doing that for others right now. And I think, David, that's very important. That's why we were excited to have you on this podcast, because we were talking to a lot of people from different generations that are going through good times and bad. And that could happen in the same day, right? You get a good deal and things can massively change in your industry or in your business. They need people like you to listen to understand in different ways to grow their business, to stay relevant, that when disruption happens, they're ready to take on that next step, or they're beating it. I always say, like, well, what's going to put us out of business? Well, I didn't build my business to get put out of business. If that's going to happen, that's going to be my own fault. But what are the different things that I can do to avoid that from happening? And that's why we create all these different things that we've created. And that's why I enjoy talking to people like yourself, David. And that's why I'm excited to listen to your different podcasts. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing a lot of your thoughts with us and the podcast. What is, besides listening to your podcast, Smashing That Plateau, that they need to check out? Again, I'll put in the show notes. Your new podcast that will be coming out soon. What is the best way people can get a hold of you?
Just go to our website, smashingtheplateau.com. That's the central hub for everything. So whatever happens, you'll see it there.
Perfect. And
you can also actually call me on the phone. We have our phone gets answered 9 to 5 Eastern time, Monday through Friday, by a live person, 212-731-0770. If you want to schedule time to speak with me, whoever answers the phone can set that up. If you go to our website, you can also schedule time to speak with me. You can fill out a form and write to me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Absolutely. Well, David, thank you again for spending time with us. We appreciate it, and look forward to staying in touch.
Eric, I'm honored to be here.
David, it has been absolutely awesome having you on this podcast. From your knowledge on podcasting to your thoughts on solopreneurship, we are all better off from the time we spent with you. The perspectives from David on increasing revenue are now perspectives you, the business leader, can use for yourself. And for that, David, thank you. And for anyone looking to talk to David about getting unstuck in business, we encourage you to reach out to him. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. You can find me on LinkedIn or contact me on Twitter at Eric_Kaz. Thank you for listening to our KazSource podcast, Entrepreneur Perspectives, building and protecting your business one podcast at a time. Until next time, we're out of here. This podcast exists in large part because of KazCM, the content marketing business inside KazSource Inc. KazCM is excited to bring the content marketing services used at KazSource to you. Learn more by visiting KazCM.com.